Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, in a certain sense, I think it is an indictment of the government that we're still here discussing this. When we raised these issues last year, we were laughed out of court with a stream of backbenchers lining up to say how great everything was inside the force and how we were somehow undermining that force. The people who were in the gallery a year on, back again, nobody in the media wanted to listen to their stories of the horrendous injustices that they had experienced. And yet here we are, almost a year later, where thanks to the persistent and heroic efforts of Maurice McCabe and John Wilson, that the ideas which were laughed at last year are actually being accepted by you and in some ways nearly promoted as your own. And while it's good that you're not opposing the bill tonight, or so we believe, that is meaningless unless it is advanced to committee stage and we can begin to get our teeth into it, because the principles of an independent police board have now been established. The dogs on the streets know that that is what we need. But as Deputy Wallace said, putting such a board on top of an existing Garda Síochána will not make a blind iota bit of difference. There needs to be a lot more, and we're at a crossroads in terms of policing in this state, and what we do need is exactly that, a Patten-style commission where we look at everything, that the days when on Garda Síochána were constituted in relation to the foundation of this state are completely different than a modern Ireland, and we need not a police force but a police service for the modern era. We need to look at dealing with its goals, its objectives, its recruitment, promotions, transparency, accountability and all of these things. And they obviously take time, but you will be judged on whether you're serious about it or not, depending on how this issue progresses over the next period in time, because this goes a lot deeper. The Morris Tribunal talked about a few very unruly Gardaí, and there's been a lot of talk about a few bad apples. The reality is there's a lot more than a few. We have to be honest about it. They're still a minority, but it is an institutional problem, and the measures put place didn't deal with it. And the only reason why the bad apples have got away with it is because their colleagues and those in authorities refused to deal with it and, in fact, covered it up, which allowed that to continue and did enormous damage to many of our citizens. It is well known that many of those who participated in the appalling crimes associated with what was known as the heavy gang in the 70s and 80s, that a lot of those Gardaí ended up getting promoted in latter years. As Deputy Wallace said, the current treatment of Maurice McCabe shows that ethos, and it's interesting that when he was restored on pulse, thanks to your intervention, the letter that he got putting him back on it was at best begrudging, where there were pages reminding him of his responsibility under the Data Protection Act, very like what Commissioner Callanan did in order to tell John Wilson and Maurice McCabe to button it around the time that the penalty points issue first came out. And I have to say, if you think, Minister, that some of the public statements being made by the present Garda Commissioner about welcoming a new approach and an open culture are true, I don't believe them to be true, because we've had testimony from serving members of the Gardaí to say behind the public door they're being told now, shut it. Don't be going shooting your mouth off. Don't be going participating in this. We had senior members of the Gardaí last week undermining GSOC and saying that GSOC wasn't a body which Gardaí should go to under some spurious excuse in that regard. And it is a fact, based on information which I've used here before, that it is our very clear understanding that Commissioner Callanan contacted all of the Garda representative organisations and asked them to issue public statements undermining GSOC. So this is a systemic problem, and we need to look at not just patching it up. Now, over the past week, I've got 2 letters from serving and retired Garda, both of which have 50 years between them. And I'll just read a bit from one of them. This Garda sergeant says that they've been in the force for over 30 years, and they're letting me know that interviews are currently being held for the promotion to the rank of sergeant and inspector, and that the competition is in its final stages. And they go on to say the method of choosing the successful candidate is the same as it's been for years. Who you know, play golf with the chief or the super, or have a super or a chief in the family. I'm not saying everybody got promoted in this way, but a large number did. I believe this system has led to where we are today. Some fine members have been overlooked year after year, and they eventually give up and become disillusioned. And they go on to say some of the people being promoted this year will be the future chiefs and the commissioners. And this person says, I think this competition should be brought to a halt until an independent authority is set up to oversee the organisation. I agree with that. If we're serious, we have to look at that, and we have to look at recruitment and that from the bottom as well. And we've made the point here previously that it's hard to see how anybody presently of the rank of assistant commissioner or higher could be possibly part of the leadership of a new force, because a lot of the information and the problems that have emerged weren't just given to the former commissioner and the former minister. Many of the ranks in the senior Gardaí were well aware of them as well, and I just want to briefly mention a couple of cases. The first one is in relation to Ian Bailey, which is centre stage to a lot of the allegations around the tapes and so on. Horrendous fitting up of a citizen and his partner, and yet we know, because we mentioned it here last year, that in 2001, 13 years ago, knowledge was made and a report done by the former DPP which said that the behaviour of the Gardaí was outrageous. Now, Ian Bailey's team have reckoned that it has cost the state 40 to 50 million in trying to fit him up in the intervening 18 years since this has started. So it's not just a financial cost, it's a human cost to him and his partner, it's a cost to Sophie Toscan de Plantier's family, and the fact, of course, that there is a murderer out there. And yet the state continues to defend itself in the case that Ian Bailey is taking. Now, in the course of that litigation that he's taking, it emerged prior to a Supreme Court appealing hearing in relation to his appeal against a High Court decision to extradite him based on a flawed European arrest warrant, a warrant which was prepared on information submitted by Gardaí who had been named in the DPP's report as behaving improperly. And this was what informed the French. I mean, you literally couldn't make this stuff up. Now, we mentioned this last year, and no one even batted an eyelid. We put it on the Dáil record, and it didn't cause any waves. And of course, subsequent to that, other information emerged, and we do know now that there are 3 senior officers where it has been reported in the media recently who in that case used improper influence on the DPP's southwestern Malachy booing to bring about a prosecution of Ian Bailey. And Ian Bailey's legal team have been informed that those officers are former Chief Superintendent Dermot Dwyer of Bandon, the state's most senior detective at the time, Chief Superintendent Sean Gammon, and the Assistant Commissioner of the South West Division, Assistant Commissioner Martin McQuinn. Now, the evidence given by that DPP's Eamon Barnes has said that pressure was put on to force a prosecution in that case. Information was told to that man. I know you were in school with the Minister for Justice at the time, John O'Donoghue. Talk to him, get a prosecution in that regard. This was a grossly serious issue. But you know what made it worse for me when I heard those names? That those names weren't new, because the Chief Superintendent, Dermot Dwyer, was the same individual who popped up in a dossier filed by former Garda Jack Doyle, who also had a programme done in 2001 where he revealed in that programme that Gardaí were involved in selling drugs and allowing criminals get their hands on some of that stock. And the allegations and the information in a dossier provided by that former Garda to Michael McDowell was that that same individual who's been named in Ian Bailey's case was given tens of thousands of pounds by a major criminal gang in that regard. So this needs a root and branch review.
Sorry, I'm loath to interrupt the Deputy, but members should not comment on
the point is, thanks, Ceann Comhairle, these run deep. You have correspondence, Minister, from the former Garda involved in the Bible Salute case, which the Taoiseach has had in the former, where this guard was shocked when he heard the former Commissioner say that there were only 2 whistleblowers inside the Guards who had problems, because he had gone to the confidential recipient and made reports that he felt that the investigation that the abduction of that woman's children hadn't been handled properly, and that as a result, if it had been, she may not have ended up being killed. Yesterday I met a former Garda who was driven out of the force in the 1990s, suffered severe harassment and persecution, did a dossier again to be investigated of very serious crimes which weren't dealt with, and subsequent to that, in the last few years, this Garda has come into evidence which suggests that there is somebody in prison at the moment for a crime that they could not possibly have committed, but that they identified the actual perpetrator as somebody whom this Garda had made the original report about years ago. We've had other stories mentioned by former Deputy, now MEP, Luke Flanagan, from other existing Gardaí. But these are only the Gardaí. What about the citizens? What about people like the family of Patrick Nugent, a 23-year-old young man, banqueting manager in Bunratty Castle, who was allegedly the victim of a heart attack at 23 years of age at a party attended by Gardaí, with 2 Gardaí present at the scene. Now, the record of the verdict into the inquest in his case in 1985 said that while it was accidental death, that the jury attached a rider to their findings because of the suppression of evidence by witnesses to the event. This is the record of the verdict. And the rider was that they felt that they were far from satisfied as to the circumstances under which Patrick Nugent sustained the injuries which caused his death, and accordingly the jury issued a request to the Minister for Justice to have the matter investigated, as his right to life hadn't been protected. It's 30 years and that matter hasn't been investigated, and that family have had no justice. There are many other families up there in the same situation. The family of Shane Toohey, Mary Maxwell, whose mother Dolores died in very sinister circumstances, Tom Kennedy, who has evidence of the land which he purchased from his brother being paid for by him, but yet he was conned out of that by a rogue solicitor, Kevin Tracy, and others who experienced the Smiths from Cavan, malicious complaints, serious Garda harassment for trying to defend their rights. And the question really is, what is going to be done to bring closure in relation to all of these areas? There's been vague references to a forum to deal with it, but as Deputy Wallace said, our offices can't deal with the scale of this. We need a serious, to my mind, Magdalen Laundry style commission of investigation where people can go and tell their stories and be heard and get an acknowledgement of the wrongs that were done to them as a first step, and out of that can possibly flow other mechanisms such as involving and getting them justice. Because while we talk about a new service, a new police service for a modern Ireland, unless we deal with the crimes and injustices of the past, we can never move on. And I said it to you before, Minister, I think you have an unenviable task here, but it's a huge opportunity as well to make things better for the good guards who are out there, who joined the force for the right reasons, who want something better, and for the citizens who've had their respect for the guards crushed because of the way in which they've been treated. They want an opportunity for justice, and I think we need to find ways of giving it to them.